Do you still struggle to follow along when native English speakers are talking? Or maybe you follow along okay, but you just wish listening was a little bit more effortless? If so, then keep watching this video for my 7 fluency tips on how to improve your listening comprehension using podcasts. Hey everyone! Welcome back to As a Second Language, the best place for intermediate to advanced level English learners who still don't feel like they are where they want to be with their English. For more fluency tips and high performance habits, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell to get notified every single week when I post a new video. Are you sick of listening to audios made by English teachers or English schools that are super clear and super slow? Not because you can't understand them, because you can, but because you feel like they aren't actually preparing you for the real world and how conversations actually go in English? If so, then keep watching this video because by the end of this video, I'm going to give you my 7 key fluency tips for how you can improve your listening comprehension in conversations in the real world using podcasts. I've used these exact methods in order to help dozens of my own students and also help myself in improving my own listening comprehension in the target languages that I'm learning. And I know that they can work just as great for you. That being said, let's dive in. The first key tip that I have for you when it comes to improving your listening comprehension using podcasts is to pick a podcast with a topic that interests you. And the reason I say this, even though it may seem obvious, is because most of the time, if we are listening to something or following some topic in our first language, we know quite a bit about it, or we know enough to talk about it, right? So if we start listening to something that interests us in the language that we're learning, then those ideas that we have that we know how to express in our first language, we start to hear them expressed, but in a slightly different way in our second language. So if your second or target language is English, for example, and you love the topic of business, then instead of listening to business podcasts in your first language, you start listening to them in English. And then you start hearing about similar topics that you may already know about, or maybe you learn more about it as you go along, but you learn how to express the same things in English. And you're not only continuing your knowledge on a topic that you care about and want to listen about, but you're also improving your listening comprehension in the second language that you are trying to learn. My second tip for improving your listening comprehension using podcasts is to pick something with several seasons or episodes. I know that's kind of weird to use that language, seasons, because it sounds a lot like a TV show or a TV series, but I think that's pretty common, or at least people who listen to podcasts often know what I'm talking about. Something like a podcast that's been going for several years or several months, and the people that create that podcast, they post consistently and there's a lot of content, are great podcasts to choose when you're trying to improve your listening comprehension. And let me tell you why. First of all, if you've ever listened to a podcast like that, you know that sometimes it's super beneficial to start from the very beginning, to start from their first episode and listen all the way through until it's current, instead of just starting at the current episode, because you get a lot of context in that time. You build a relationship with the person talking and you start to hear different ideas so that when you listen to another episode, you understand the context of things that they're referring back to. Now, depending on the podcast, this might differ. So some podcasts you can listen to a brand new episode and not need any context whatsoever, but other types of podcasts are more of like a story, or they refer back to past podcasts often. So something I would suggest is picking something with a lot of episodes so that you can start from the very beginning, so that you can basically test yourself. You can not only gain the context and see if you can pick up on things in the future when you listen to future episodes and they are referring back to the past, but also so you can test your comprehension skills from the beginning and see how much you understand on episode 1 and then how much more you understand when you get to episode like 400. My third tip is really for people who still feel like their listening skills are a lot farther behind than they would like. However, if you're pretty confident in your listening skills and you're just wanting to boost it, this still could work for you too, especially if you're not used to just listening to something without also watching it. I know a lot of people watch TV and movies in English, hoping to improve their listening skills, and that's awesome. But the thing with movies and TVs is that you can see the context on the screen, right? So there's an element there that you still have to help you with the context and to help you with what's going on. Whereas when you're just listening and improving just your listening skills, podcasts are great because there is no frame of reference, right? You're forced to just focus on the words that are coming into your ears. So it's a really good way to push you, right? And to take your listening skills to the next level. But the tip that I will give you here for number 3 is if you're really scared about just jumping into any podcast about any topic, is to start with news. If you start with podcasts about news, this is a really great first step because usually the people giving the information talk in a very clear and more slow manner. Okay. And also they don't necessarily talk in super formal language, but it is more formal than a lot of slang and things like that. So it's really good for a place to start if you have been learning English for a while, but you're still not quite comfortable with casual conversations and the back and forth and slang and all those things. News can be really good because it's clear, it's straightforward, and usually is pretty easy to understand. Before we jump into number 4, I want to know, what podcasts are you listening to in your first language? Drop your answers in the comment section below. Diving back in, tip number 4 is to pause the audio, okay? I know this may seem crazy that I'm giving this as a tip, but a lot of us fall into the trap of just listening, and we think to ourselves like, oh, I didn't catch that, and then we just keep listening. It is okay to pause the video, okay? If you need to, if you heard something but you weren't quite sure what they said, or you didn't quite understand what they were talking about, the great thing about podcasts is you can pause them. You can pause them, rewind them, play them again, and listen again. If you still don't understand, pause, rewind, slow it down. Most podcasts have a feature where you can slow down the speed of the audio and listen to it a little bit more carefully. And I think that this is an amazing feature, especially when you're trying to learn a second language and listen just in that language. So pause, rewind, slow it down, and press play, listen to it again. And then when you've listened to it, pause it and think about it. Think like, what were they trying to say? What did they mean by this? If you've got it, you're good to go. I would even say rewind it and listen to it at normal speed again, and then just keep going. But if it still doesn't make sense, take as much time as you need. And also, stay tuned for tip number 6, because I think it will also help you if you're still struggling with whatever they were trying to say. Okay. Tip number 5, I am really excited about, because this is for people who are really confident with their English listening skills, but they still feel like they need to push themselves because for some reason when they get into conversations with people and they start to get really spontaneous, sometimes they can be hard to follow and they really just want to like solidify the fact that their listening skills are good and that they can keep up with any speed. For people who are struggling with this, I have 2 suggestions. Number 1, if you're really wanting to push your listening skills, you can up the speed. I mentioned in the last tip that if you're struggling to understand a part, you should slow it down and re-listen to it. But if you have gotten to the point where you're really confident with your listening skills and you want to take it one step further, up the speed. Go to 1.5 or even double speed and see if you can keep up with what they're saying. If you can, I can almost guarantee that your listening skills are in really great shape. But the second part of this is if you are trying to challenge yourself, a way you can increase your listening comprehension using podcasts is to listen to more challenging podcasts. I mentioned before that if you need things to slow down and you want them to be more clear, listen to podcasts about news. That's a really good place to start. But if you're trying to challenge yourself and listen to podcasts about topics that maybe the speakers are interviewing each other or talking about random things, a really great type of podcast to choose is one by a comedian. And that might seem kind of weird thing to say, but I have found that podcasts that are hosted by comedians usually have the most random conversations. They will start talking about one thing and then that will lead to something else and then that will lead to something else, and you really have to pay attention and your listening skills have to be sharp in order to follow the plot lines, so to speak, of the different conversation topics. So that's an excellent way to increase your listening comprehension skills if you are worried about the spontaneity of conversations. And tip number six. Okay, this is a 6 in ASL, okay? I know it looks like a 3, but it's a 6. Trust me, okay? Tip number 6 is to see if they have transcripts that go along with the videos. If you are listening, but you really feel like you want to follow along for clarity, especially in the beginning, finding podcasts where the people are making transcripts to go along with their audios that maybe you could download off of online is a really great way to double check that you know what you're hearing and what you're seeing is the same thing. It's also a really good way to go back. So remember earlier I said that sometimes even when you slow it down and listen to it again, you still might not hear what they're saying or quite understand what they're trying to say because they said it so fast, maybe their words slurred together a little bit, or it's just something that you've never heard before, right? Transcripts can be a great way to see the little nuances in things and to understand like, okay, that's what they were trying to say. That's what I couldn't hear. Or, oh, wow, that's an expression I've never heard before. Now I can Google that and see what that means. So seeing if they have a transcript that goes along with the podcast is an excellent tool for taking that listening and comprehension one step further. And finally, tip number 7. And yes, this is a 7, okay? Also in ASL, 7, whatever. Tip number 7 is to journal what works and what doesn't. I always tell my students and clients to journal about their exercises. Whatever you're doing when you're working on improving a skill, whether it be language learning or anything else, I've always found journaling to be a super helpful tool to basically assess yourself. You're going to say, okay, today I listened to this podcast. This is what I learned. This is what I think about it. This is what I struggled with. This is what I had a hard time with. This is what I did great. Whatever you want to say, anything that's going on in your head, anything that's going on in your heart, journal about it, okay? It's also a really great way to track your progress. So you can say, this is working, this is not working, and then write your ideas. Like, what can I do to fix this? What can I do to improve this? Or maybe it's too easy. And you noted that in your journal. You said, I listened to this podcast today and it was way too easy. So you can brainstorm different ideas about how to make it a little bit harder for yourself. Whatever you're going through, journaling is a great way to track your progress, what you're learning through podcasts, and also decide which ones are best for you at the skill level that you're at. Now you know my 7 fluency tips for improving your listening comprehension using podcasts. But what about the other 3 quadrants of language? Speaking, reading, and writing. How do you put all those things together? And what's the framework or the best framework to learn everything in a language? Well, I have written an ebook called How to Learn Any Language that details those steps, and you can get it in the description of this video. Also, if you like this video and you want more content like this every single day, come follow me at As a Second Language on Instagram. I think it's right here, As a Second Language. And I'll also have that in the description of this video so you can find me. If you like this video, make sure you let me know by giving me a like below. And also, if you found it useful, share it with a friend. And as always, keep going, keep being consistent, and I'll see you right here next week at As a Second Language. See ya!